Today we're talking about the 4-2-3-1 in youth football. So let's go. We're going to start covering more 11v11 content here on the channel. I know a lot of you guys have reached out and asked for that. So I wanted to start with the 4-2-3-1 formation. This is a formation that is very popular professionally and has trickled down to the youth game.
We start with a back line of 4, including 2 center backs and 2 fullbacks. The next line consists of 2 defensive center midfielders, also known as a double pivot. This is followed by an attacking line of a central midfielder, and then 2 wide players, either wings or wide midfielders, and lastly, a single central striker.
The 4-2-3-1 really centers around the 2 defensive center midfielders, or the double pivot. And you can almost track the popularity of this formation back to the rise of the high press. Because the first advantage that you have is an overload in the center of the field in buildup. So you have an extra player there to try to keep possession and deal with a high press. This allows teams that are good at possessing the ball to be patient and find ways to build out of the back, especially through the center part of the field. This allows for different lines of passing and different angles that you don't normally see with just one pivot. Another major advantage is the defensive stability you get with having those 2 defensive center midfielders. So between the back 4 and the 2 defensive center midfielders, you have a very solid core base to defend with. Having this defensive stability allows the 3 attacking midfielders in the third line to get forward a little bit more freely, almost to where you have a line of 4 attacking players, including the striker. Like any system of play, there will be weaknesses, starting with having the right personnel to run this formation, specifically at the double pivot. So you have to have 2, 3, even 4 good players who can possess the ball in the middle of the field. Now that includes center backs, that includes a double pivot, even the attacking center midfielder in the central portion of the field has to be good at keeping the ball at their feet, combination play. So if you're a team that plays a little bit more direct, maybe isn't as good in possession, this probably isn't the right formation for you. The formation can be a little bit defensive if not taught appropriately. So your 2 defensive center midfielders sometimes have a tendency to sit back and get flat. This can cause some disconnect between the double pivot and the line of 3 attacking midfielders. And specifically those wide attacking midfielders in the line of 3, sometimes they can get lost, especially in midfield transition if they're not strongly connected. And lastly, this is a formation that plays with a single striker, which is fine. You just have to know that you're always going to be at a 1v2 in the back with 2 center backs if the team's playing a 2 center back formation.
In terms of your starting positions, you want your 2 center backs nice and wide, just on the edge of the 18, and your 2 fullbacks wide to the touchlines. You'll want the 2 defensive center midfielders tucked in just a little bit central to the center backs, as shown here. Similarly, I like the wide midfielders or the wings to be tucked in just central to the fullbacks, while the 9 and the 10 occupy central positions to start.
So just like in my other videos, the way that I think about movement of the ball through the different areas of the field is, are we wide or are we central?
So let's start with looking at what buildup looks like through the center part of the field. And this should be an area that you're looking to exploit because you have the numerical advantage in the 4-2-3-1. So the ball here is played out to our right center back, and I really want to focus on the initial movement of the double pivot, because this is a very common mistake that I see coaches make when using this formation. The defensive center midfielder on the side the ball is played out needs to track over to be on the same line as the center back. This is slightly counterintuitive, but will make sense in a minute. The defensive center midfielder on the opposite side will come down and occupy a space normally reserved for a single pivot, so in a traditional 4-3-3, for example.
It's critical here that the 6 drop and the 8 stay high. And you'll see why in a minute, but if they stay along that same line, then it's going to be easy to defend.
So let's add defenders, and here I've chosen to have a front three pressing as well as a traditional three in the midfield. And this is a very common front, especially in the United States where the 4-3-3 is still very prominent. In a high press with three up top, as the ball gets played to your right center back, the first thing the line of defense is going to try to do is close down space. As they do this, you can see the positioning of the 6 and the 8. They're staggered, and the 8 is in line with the 4. The 6 has to know how close the opposing wing is to them if they're pressing over. And the 8 needs to know where the opposing midfielder, here the number 10 on red, is to know if they can turn. So in terms of building through the central part of the field, the 4 has a couple of options. A direct ball to the 8 certainly is an option. However, typically the midfielder who shades over to the side the ball went to attracts a lot of attention, both from the midfielder, here the 10, but also the 9. If this ball is played into a tight space into the 8, likely he'd have to have his back to pressure and be looking for a quick combination with the other midfielders to get out. The most common way to build out of the back centrally with the 4-2-3-1 is looking to combine the double pivots. This is done by creating what is known as the S pattern in build-up. The lower lying defensive center midfielder, here the 6, receives a ball from the center back, then looks to combine with the 8 to eventually find the 10 to get out. If the 4 decides to switch the field here and go over to the other center back, it's vital that the two defensive center midfielders switch positions. So the 6 has to advance up the field and become aligned with the 5, and the 8 needs to drop into that pivot spot the 6 was in order to set themselves up for an S-shaped pattern. The last option, just to briefly mention in terms of building centrally through this formation, would be to play a ball over the top or beyond to the 9 or the 10 centrally. Now, this is going to be a much less of a percentage chance of getting out, and really, given this formation and what you're trying to do, I wouldn't recommend doing this very often, but it is an option.
So that's build up in the central part of the field. Now let's talk about the wide areas.
So we'll start again with the ball at our right center back's feet, and I've added the back line of defenders here because we're going to be building through the wide areas. So it's the same three-man press, and they're trying to close down the right side of the field.
So here are the options that the right center back has trying to build out of the wide areas. There's the fullback on that side, the defensive center midfielder on that side, there's the wing on that side for a dangerous through ball, or an over-the-top ball to the 9 or the 10. Now, before we go through these in detail, I do want to bring up a concept that's not necessarily specific to the 4-2-3-1, but sometimes you're going to be playing in one wide area of the field, really to draw the defenders in to switch the point of attack to the other wide area. Sometimes people are so focused on just one wide area that they don't understand that we're using, let's say, the right wide area, the right side of the pitch, to draw defenders in to move the point of attack to the left side to try to build out of the left side. So it's really important to think about the wide areas together, not just the left wide area or the right wide area.
This concept is highlighted by the first option that the right center back has here in playing it to the right fullback. This is really not a great option for building out of the right wide area here because we're just continuing to close down our space. Really, the point of this option and playing it to the right fullback is to draw the defenders in to ultimately switch field to move out into the left wide area, building out that way. Any ball into the defensive center midfielder on that side, just like when you build out centrally, when you're building out wide, is going to attract a lot of attention. So the main way of building out of the back here through the 8 is going to be with combination passes, either with the wing or the fullback. A direct ball from the center back to the wing is the most dangerous way of building out of the back from the wide area. If this opens up, it should definitely be taken advantage of. However, once this is done once or twice, defenders tend to get smart to it and really start covering the wing tight. If played, we would encourage the wing to either go 1v1 with their defender or combine with the 9 or the 10. Lastly, any direct balls over the top to the 9 or the 10 in the wide areas will require combinations with back to pressure.
So how do you take these build-up concepts and train your team to get comfortable in a 4-2-3-1? Well, the first thing you're going to do is start with pattern choreography. Now, most of you know, if you watch some of my other videos, that I'm a big fan of this.
With pattern choreography, I recommend you start slowly and then build into more patterns. I would start with these 4. For those of you unfamiliar with pattern choreography, this is simply putting your team through choreographed patterns of play. I have it shown here with mannequins, but certainly you could do it with training sticks or even just corner flags. But you're going to want something that's going to represent the defenders. You're going to want to put the mannequins or training sticks in the area where you think the defenders are going to be. So here we're playing balls out to the right center back. So I've put the mannequins in the spaces where I think the press is going to be. The particular pattern needs to be done at game speed. Here I have shown an S pattern, and I usually like to have them finish at a pug goal that I have set up here as well. I like to run through the pattern several times before moving on to a positional game or adding defenders. Here's the central combination with the 2 defensive center midfielders. Here's a wide combination, and you can see instead of finishing in the goal, we've just broken the line to end it. And lastly, here's the switch.
So aside from pattern choreography, there are positional rondos and positional games that can help your team build out in a 4-2-3-1.
The best positional rondo for this purpose is a 5v3+2. So you can see here it's positional. You've got your 2 center backs at the bottom, you have your 2 fullbacks on the sides, you have your double pivot in the middle, which is the +2, and then you have your central attacking midfielder at the top. So you can run this a couple of different ways. I do like to make a game of it, so to have goals on the 4 edges here, as you can see, and then try to play to a certain score. So if the team in possession can get a certain number of passes, 5, 7, 10, whatever the strength of your team is, that's a point. And then if the defenders win the ball back and they score, that's 3 points or a higher number of points. And then you play to a certain number. So you play to 10 or you play to 5 or whatever it is. And all you're doing here is trying to encourage those patterns of play that you worked on in the pattern choreography, just at a smaller scale. So really working with that double pivot on their movement as the ball goes from center back to center back, working on the S pattern, keeping possession. Here's an example of a positional game that could really help your team build out of the back in a 4-2-3-1. So you have 8 field players plus 6 defenders with our goalkeeper. So the ball starts with our keeper, and the goal is to build out of the back to either get to the pug goals up top, or the 9 can only go in between the pugs and is therefore a target 9. If we're able to get the ball to the target 9, that's 2 goals. Now, I would put some restraints on this, for example, saying that you had to connect through your double pivot before you scored or before you hit the target 9. Otherwise, you're just going to be getting a lot of direct balls over the top, and that's not the point of this exercise. What you're going to want to do is, again, reinforce the patterns of play and the positional awareness of what happens when pressure is coming from one side, when pressure is coming from the other, and how do we get out of the back. If the defenders win the ball, they go to the large goal at the bottom. I would definitely make this competitive and play to a certain score.
Hey guys, I hope you liked that video, especially if you run a 4-2-3-1. Be on the lookout for a couple of videos coming after this on midfield transition, attacking and defending in this shape. As always, guys, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments or reach out to me directly. Thanks.